Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today, we're trying to amass the most money by building factories and warehouses. We'll be buying and selling containers from those factories and warehouses to and from our opponents. Now eventually, those containers will find their way on a boat and go to an island where they'll be auctioned off, where not only will the seller make money from the opponents, but also from government subsidies. Today, we're taking a look at this 10th anniversary jumbo edition of Container that features resin miniature ships over 7 inches long. It's 3 to 5 players, takes 75 to 90 minutes to play, and is published by Mercury Games. Today, we'll be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now, I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Container is an economic game for 3 to 5 players where you're trying to have the most money. You'll have machines that will create containers in a factory store. Other players will be able to buy these. You'll be buying from other players' factory stores and putting them in your harbor stores where other players will come into your harbor and will be paying the amount of those onto their ship. Other players will be coming to your harbor and buying containers from your harbor store, giving you money, and then taking them through open water to an island where they will sell them off to the highest bidder. But if the bids aren't high enough, they can decide to pay the highest bidder to the bank and get the container themselves. But that causes inflation to rise through a government subsidy. The more machines and warehouses you have, the more containers you can store and produce, but they do cost money, which is the name of the game. And at the end of the game, some of your containers will be worth double the points if you've got at least one of each container type. But be careful, because the containers you have the most of gets thrown overboard off the island because you had too much of it and are worth nothing. To set up, you're first going to find this island board and you're going to place it right in the middle of the table. Next, you're going to create a general supply of components. Now this will depend on the amount of players. Here in the lower left, you'll see the number of warehouses, the number of containers, and the number of machines of each color that you'll need. For instance, in the 3-player game that we're setting up here, we have 12 warehouses, we have 10 containers of each of the colors, and we have 2 machines of each of the colors. Any warehouses, containers, and machines that wouldn't be included here can be left back in the box. Next, you'll create the bank off to the side. They're going to be different denominations that you'll stack all the same denominations together. You'll also put these loan cards next to the bank as well. Then each player is going to get $20. They'll get this with 5 ones, 5 twos, a 5, and you're also going to give each player 2 0 bluff bid cards. Now, if you're playing with less than 5 players, any 0 bluff bid cards left over will go back in the box. You don't need them. Each player only gets 2, and this goes with their money. Now, as you can see, the money cards all have the same back. That's because money is secret in this game. However, the number of money cards you have is public knowledge, so all players should keep all their money face down in the stack in front of them throughout the game. Each player will then select which color they'd like to be throughout the game and take the player board of that color and place it right in front of them. They want this side to be closest to them and the harbors to be out towards the center of the board, because this is where other players' ships will be coming in the harbor throughout the game. Now, each color also has a logo that you can use for colorblind friendliness. Each player will also take 1 warehouse from the general supply that was already made, and you're going to place it in this furthest left spot that has a warehouse on it. It has a dash, that's the free spot. Everyone's going to place a warehouse from the supply right there in their own player board. You're then going to take 1 of each of the machines of each color. You're going to place them in the lid of the box, and then without looking, you're going to randomly take 1 of these and place it on each of the player boards. Which means for each player, they're going to get 1 machine, and they're going to place it on the circle. Notice the machines look like a circle. The furthest one to the left that has a dash, which is a free spot. So each player is going to get 1 of these randomly. Which means in our case, since we're playing with 3 players, there'll be 2 left over. You place these back into the supply. Each player will then take 1 container from the general supply that matches the color of the machine they've just been given randomly and place it into their factory store at the $2 amount. So in this case, I had a purple machine, and now I have a single purple container in the $2 spot. Next, you're going to find the investment bank board that looks like this, and you'll put it out towards the middle of the table, somewhat close to the island, but still leaving a little bit of room in between them. Now here, you're also going to get a $1 money card and put it in the 1 spot on the right. You're going to get 2 $1 cards and put it in this number 2, and 3 $1 cards and put it on the number 3 on the right side, just like this. You'll also find the Broker Arrow card, which has a telephone and a white arrow. And you're going to find the Payment card. It's double-sided. It doesn't matter which side's up, but it also has this telephone sign on both sides of it. Just place them near the invest bank for now. It doesn't matter where they are, just somewhere near it for now. Next, you're going to take one container of each color, not from the general supply that you already set up, but the ones that were removed from the game. You're going to take one of each of those and put it in the lid of the box. You're going to be drawing 3 of these randomly from here. The first 2 that you draw will both go into the number 1's container spot, and the last one that you draw, which is the third one, will go into the number 2. Any of the other ones that were left over in that lid get removed from the game, because remember, they did not come from the supply, they came from out of the game. Next, you'll find the 5 container value cards. They look something like this. They have different types of container colors and different amounts of points values. You're going to take these, shuffle them up all face down, and you'll deal 1 face down secretly to each player. They can look at this, but they never show it to anyone else, and it stays face down on the bottom right-hand side of their player board. They can look at it anytime, but it must be kept secret. Since each player only gets 1 of these, if there's any left over, put them face down inside the box of the game without looking. The last thing you'll do is you'll take each of the player's huge ship that comes in their color and place them out into the open sea, which essentially is anywhere out on the table that's not touching or on top of a board. So this is what the setup would look like for a 3-player game. We have the island board, we have the bank, we have the general supply, we have the investment bank, and we have the different player boards and the ships. The object of the game is to have the most money at the end of the game, and you'll do so by selling containers throughout the game and selling them at your own island spot at the end. Now, each of those containers in your spot on that island is going to be worth a certain amount of points depending on the secret container value card that you got at the beginning of the game. Now, there's a little twist to the final scoring, but we'll go over that later. The game is played in clockwise order, and on your turn you'll be taking some actions, and this will continue until any 2 of the 5 different containers are completely gone from the supply. On your turn, there's 2 phases you'll go through. The first one is called the pre-turn action phase. These are actions that are mandatory if certain conditions exist. We're going to go over these later since you won't quite understand them yet. After that, you'll go to the normal actions phase where you'll be selecting 2 actions. And these you can select different ones or the same ones twice unless otherwise stated. So one of the possible actions you can take is buy a warehouse or a machine. Let's first go over buying a machine. Machines are here. What they do throughout the game is they will produce containers into your factory store. This is where other players are going to buy containers from your factories for the prices listed here. And to buy a machine, I look to the first spot to the right of my machines that's open, in this case it's here, and I would pay that much to the bank. That would be $6, and I can take any of the machines that's still in the supply and place it here, as long as it's not one I already have. You can never have 2 of the same machine colors, and of course if there's no machines left of the ones you want to buy, you can't buy it. And also, since there's only 4 machine colors, the most you can have here is 4 machines, 1 of each color. Another good thing about these machines is they allow you to hold up to 2 containers for each machine you have. So right now, because I have 2 machines, I can actually hold a total of 4 containers, 2 for each machine, in my factory store. Now the other possible action you can take with this is buying a warehouse. Remember, for a single action, you're doing one of the other, buying a machine or buying a warehouse, but I'm showing you both here. You would buy a warehouse for the price of the existing spot just to the right of where you have your last warehouse. And so this would be $4. I would spend that. I would take a warehouse from the supply and place it right on there. Also note that if there's no warehouses left in the supply, you cannot take this action, and the most warehouses you can ever have is 5. Now, each of these warehouses will allow you to hold 1 container anywhere in your harbor shops. We'll show you how this works later, but keep in mind, machines, each of them allow you to hold up to 2 into your factory stores, and each warehouse allows you to hold 1 container anywhere in your harbor stores. So here I can hold a total of 2 containers because I have 2 warehouses, and here I can hold a total of 4 containers because I have 2 machines. And holding more is always good because the more you hold, the more items that people can buy from you, because players are going to be buying containers from both your factory stores and your harbor stores for the amount that's listed where that container is. And remember, either buying a warehouse or a machine was a single action. You get 2 actions per turn. So if you wanted to do both of those, that could be both of your actions. After I would take 2 actions, it would go to the next player clockwise, but I'm going to go through all of the different actions. So another possible action is to produce containers from the factory store. We now have 2 machines. When you do that, you must pay. And regardless of how many containers you're creating, you must pay $1 to the union boss, who is the player to your right. Now that $1 would come from your stack of cards that you would give to that player to the right when creating any amount of containers from your machines. Now when you do this, you will create 1 container for each of the color of your machines. I have 1 purple and 1 brown. So I take 1 purple and 1 brown from the general supply. If there's no more left, they will not make that container. Now here, you can place these anywhere you want on your factory store. I could place them both in the same spot. I could place them separate spots. I could place them anywhere. I could even just have all of them here in the 2 spot here. But let's say I go like this. Also, anytime you do this, you can rearrange any of the containers that are already priced. You can also take this action to not even produce, but to just rearrange. However, anytime you take this action, you must produce everything that you can. In this case, I produced 2 containers. Now, if my board looked like this and I took this action now, I should be able to make 2, 1 purple and 1 brown. But if you remember, each machine allows you to hold 2 containers. So the most containers I can hold here are 4. So in this case, I can only make 1 more container. In this case, I would have to decide which one of these to be able to create. And keeping in mind, that color container has to be available in the supply. So let's say I took that action now, I would only be able to create 1 container because I have 2 machines, and that would max out my containers here for 4. And again, I can put this anywhere, and anytime you take this action, again, you can rearrange this. And at this point, I am full. So I could theoretically, for an action on my turn, take this action to not produce because I'm already full, but just to rearrange prices. Another possible action you can take is to buy containers for your harbor store. Here I have my warehouses, and remember, my harbor store can hold 1 container for each warehouse, so I can hold a total of 2 containers right here. So one of these actions is to buy containers to be able to place this, which will sell to other players. Now anytime you're buying containers, either from the harbor store or the factory stores, you have to buy it from someone else. You can never buy it from yourself. So here I'm over at the green players board, and I'm looking at their factory stores. Now remember, I can hold up to 1 container per warehouse. I have 2 warehouses. I could buy up to both of these. Now for a single action, I can buy as many as I can hold, assuming I can pay for it, but I can only buy from 1 player for a single action. So I could buy this one, or in this case, both. So I would pay this player $3, and I would take both of these. Now when I bought those, that player could not refuse me being able to buy things from them. Now when I get those, I'm going to put them in my harbor store. Again, the max is containers equals the amount of warehouses I have, and I can set the price. I could go like this, I could go like this, I could put them all in the same, it doesn't matter. Again, I'm setting the price, and that's how you do it. Now, if I already had any containers here, when I take this action, I can rearrange anything that's here, similar to how we did when we were rearranging the factory store. And it's possible to take this action to not even buy anything, but just to rearrange your pricing. And remember, if I wanted to buy from another player, it would have to be another separate action. And remember, you're only getting 2 actions on a turn. Another possible action you can take is called Call the Broker, and that uses the investment bank board here. Now this investment bank has 3 completely different brokers, each of them offering different things. This one is offering $3, this one's offering $2 or a black container, this one's offering $1 or these 2 containers. When you call the broker, you can decide which broker and which side you're trying to make a deal on. Let's say I wanted to go for these 2 containers. The first thing you do is you take this broker card and you're going to put it in one of the 3 ones that this arrow is pointing to. So I'm going to put it here, saying that I'm going to be working with this broker. Now, since I want containers, I have to bid with money. If I wanted the money, I would have to bid with containers from my own supply. But let's say we first just wanted to go for these containers here. I would take this payment card and place it in front of me. Now in this case, since I'm bidding for the containers, I'm going to put this card on the side that shows the 3 brokers with the containers. And since I'm bidding for containers, I need to use money. So in this case, I would place this near my harbor card and place the amount of money that I'm bidding right on top of that card like this. And this shows everybody that I am the one bidding for that, and that's how much I'm bidding. Now there we were bidding for the containers, so we bid with money to win the containers. But let's say instead of doing that, you didn't want to win these containers, you wanted to win this money. You would then place this here, and if you're trying to win money, you actually use containers to bid. And if you prefer, when you're bidding for money, you can place the arrow card on that side of the investment bank. Now here you can take any containers in any of your stores and place them on the payment card. Now the payment card is flipped over now. It shows a warehouse and a machine. If I take a container from my machine, or containers, they all go on this side because we got to track where they came from in case we don't end up winning this bid. If we take one from here or more, they go on the warehouse side. Again, this is just tracking. Now it doesn't matter which colors these are. It doesn't matter what price they're at. It's just a number of containers. So here my bid is 2 containers. Now once the arrow card is already in one of these slots, that means somebody else is already bidding for something from the investment bank. So if another player wanted to take the call broker action, they could not just bid for anything they want. They have to try to beat the bid that's currently going on. So let's say the next player, the green player, wanted to try to outbid me. I had bid 2 containers, they're willing to bid 3. Now keep in mind that any either money or containers that are tied up in this bid are not considered to be in your hand. Meaning, I can't do anything with these containers while they're here, and if I had money there, it's assumed that I don't have that money. But in this case, let's say we lost that bid to the next player, we would take these and put them back to the corresponding spot. That's why this card's important. I would put it back here, but the container that it goes back here, or containers, can be repriced. Now you can't reprice the ones that are already there, just the ones you're taking back on. You can reprice them as you see fit, and same for this. And then this card would be passed to that player that won, and they would place the containers just as I showed you before. Now if you were trying to win the containers with money, if you get outbid, you simply take the money from here that you were bidding and it goes back into your hand where you can use it immediately again. However, let's assume that it went all the way around through all the players and it came back to me. I mentioned there's some pre-turn actions that you're mandatory if certain conditions exist. One of the things you have to do at the beginning of your turn is if you own the broker bid card here and it's back to you, then you must do that transaction first. Now in this case, I had bid with containers for money. The first thing they would do is take the money they earned and that goes in their hands. They can use that immediately. Then they're going to pay containers, and you always pay containers from the top down, starting with the top, and you can decide which container goes where and working your way down, and that's it. So even this was the one I bought it from, it did not get any containers there. Now let's say I actually had bid more than that. Let's say I had bid 3 additional containers. What you do is you would continue to work your way down, 1, 2, 3, and then start at the top and work your way down again, continuing to repeat until your bid is completely paid. However, let's say this was the board and I had just won the bid for this container, which meant I spent money. I would take this container and I would place it onto the harbor spot on the investment bank, which means I need to move my ship over there later to get that. And obviously, regardless of how many containers I won, they would all go there. And when paying money, it goes from the top all the way down, and if there's still more money to be paid, it'll go start at the top and continue to go down like this again. However, if you feel comfortable calculating how much each broker would get, you can just start from the top, go to the bottom, put the right amount of money on there. And anytime any broker starts to have a lot of bills on there, feel free to color up, meaning making change with the normal bank, just so it makes it easier to see how much money's on each broker. So just to summarize, when taking the call broker action, if the bid cards are just hanging out by the investment bank, you take them and make your bid. If another player has it, you have to outbid them for the same thing. And if these cards are in front of you at the beginning of your turn, you must enact that bid and complete that transaction before you do any of your normal actions. Also, you cannot take this action if during your pre-actions phase, you actually did win the auction for this, and you can't take this if it's the last turn of the game. The last possible action you can take is sailing your ship. Now when doing this, your ship can be in one of 3 places. It can be at the island, it can be in some other player's harbor, and when that is, it's any other player or the investment bank's harbor, or it could just be out in the middle of the open sea. Those are the 3 possible spots that it can be. And you can never go to your own harbor. Now for each of those different spots, it costs 1 action in order to move it there. For example, this ship is in the open sea. If it wanted to move to this harbor or any of the harbors that's not their own, from the open sea it's just 1 sail ship action. If they were already in a harbor, it would take 1 sail ship action to get back out to the open sea, and it would take another action if they wanted to go from there to the island. So each of those 3 spots, regardless of where you are, takes 1 sail the ship action. Keep in mind you're only getting 2 actions per turn. Now, if you move your ship to another player's harbor, after you've moved in there, you have the option to buy containers that are in their harbor store. Now when purchasing containers, they can buy as many as they like that are here for the price that's listed in the harbor store spot that container is in. For example, this yellow player would give the red player $4 to take this and put it on their ship. This player has no obligation to buy them when they go there, but if they'd like to, they can buy as many as they can, assuming they have the money to pay this player, and assuming that their ship is not completely full. As you can see, it holds 5 different containers. Now this option of purchase always happens at the end of your turn. So at the beginning of your turn, you could not buy. You can only buy at the end of your sell actions turn. So you could not just sit here at the beginning of your turn and buy and go away. It would actually take 2 sell actions to do that, because you would essentially have to sell and then sell back to be able to buy it. And the player who you're buying from can never refuse you buying containers from them. Now for a sale action, if you move out to open sea, nothing happens. However, if you sail and you end up on the island, then an auction will happen right then, and this will end your turn at the end of this auction. So make sure that if you're doing this, it's your second action for the turn, because at the end of an auction, it goes to the next player, regardless of which action it was, your first or your second. So how the auction works is it's simultaneous. All the players that weren't the one that brought their ship to the island to cause this auction to happen is going to bid at least 1 card from their stack of money cards. Obviously they get to choose which ones and how many cards they'd like. And so they're going to take those cards and they're going to take some money cards into their hand, keeping the exact number of cards and the values of here hidden, and then everyone gets ready to simultaneously reveal. If you remember at the beginning of the game, each player got 2 0 bluffing cards, and this is the section of the game in which you can use those to make it look like your bid's going to be bigger than it really is. In this case, I have a total of 2. Now, if it happens to be a tie, the tied players go through one more round of bidding, but in this case, they don't have to play a card if they don't want to, if they didn't want to bid anything more. If it's still tied after that second round, then the active player, the one that caused the auction, gets to say who won the bid. Now, first of all, anyone that has lost, did not win the bid, takes all the cards and puts it back in their money stack. Anyone that did win also takes any 0 bluffing cards and puts those back in their stack. These never leave you, so you'll always have 2 bluffing cards for the whole entire game. Now, when the auction's over, there's 2 possible things that can happen. Number 1, the active player can accept the highest bid. Now, let's say the red player, their highest bid was 2 and they were the highest bidder. If they accept the bid, the red player will pay this money to the active player for all of the containers that are on that ship. So in this case, they'd give 2 to that player, and this would go into the red player's section of the island, which is going to be worth points at the end of the game. And when the active player accepts that bid from the highest bidder, they also get the same amount from the bank as a government subsidy. So if the final bid was 2 and they accepted it, they'd get 2 from the player and 2 from the bank for the government subsidy. Now the active player can decide to decline the bid. Let's say this was that highest bid, the red player, and that active player declined it. The player that had won the bid by the most amount would put that back onto their money stack. Then the active player would pay whatever that highest bid amount was to the bank. And they would be able to keep all of this that was on their ship and put it in their own area. Then the normal bank will pay a government subsidy to the investment bank. So in this case, it was $2 was the winning bet. So just like as if we had won the bid here before, you're going to put $1 at a time, and if there's more than 3, you just keep going top and bottom, as if we had just shown you how to win bids here earlier. Now this simulates the government adjusting the money supply in response to the players pushing money out of the game. But just in real life, this can be ineffective or even cause inflation, and this is another important item to keep in mind, is that when considering the option to decline all the bids, since it may have an impact that you may not have considered by adding extra currency to the game. Speaking of bringing more money into the game, at any time during the game, you can take a loan. And you take one of those loan cards that you used in setup that's over by the bank, and this will get you $10. So you'll get $10 in cash from the bank, and you put it in your money stack. However, this makes it so that during your pre-turn actions, you are forced to pay $1 interest. Now, the most loans you can ever have is 2. You can never have more than that. Now, that $1 interest goes to the number 1 broker in the investment bank. Now, it's possible to even get a second loan. The max loans you can have is 2, and it's possible to get this loan in order to pay the interest for this loan. However, when it's the beginning of your turn in the pre-turn action phase, if you have 2 of them, you have to spend $2 in interest. The first $1 would go to the number 1 broker, and the second $1 would go to the number 2 broker. Now, if you're unable to pay that interest at the beginning of your turn, you go into default, and you must pay 1 container per interest dollar. So if you've defaulted on 1 loan, you've got to pay 1 container. If you defaulted on both loans, you got to pay 2 containers. those containers first have to be able to come from your island space on the board. Now, if you don't have any containers there, you'd have to pay that with containers from your ship. If you didn't have any ship, you'd have to pay it from your harbor from the investment bank. If you didn't have any there, you'd have to pay one from your harbor store, and if you had none there, you'd have to pay it from your factory store. Now, it's terrible news if the bank seizes your container, so do not allow your loan cards to go into default. Now, at any time during your turn, after you've paid the interest, you can pay the $10 to get rid of a loan and put it back into the supply, and the money would just go into the normal bank. And also keep in mind, getting these loans might give you cash at the right time to win the right auction. Turns continue in a clockwise motion until 2 of the 5 colors of containers are completely gone from the general supply. If there's an ongoing call the broker auction going on, that player immediately wins the auction and follows the steps as previously stated. They would take money in their hand if they won money, and if they won containers, it would go into their harbor on the investment bank. We would then go to final scoring. Each player would then reveal their secret container value card. Let's say this was the one for the red player. First, we look to see, do we have at least one of each of the 5 colors? And in this case, we do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one of each of the 5. That means for the second one from the highest has a 5/10. If you have one of each color, this becomes a 10. Otherwise, it's 5. However, then you have to see which container you have the most of. In this case, it is the yellow kinds. Now, those have to be thrown out of the game for good because you had too many of them. You would then count up. Each of these is worth what it is. This purple's worth 2, that black is worth 6, these 2 browns are worth 4 each, and this one, because we had one of each of the 5, was worth 10 each, so a total of 26 for that player. So as you can see, getting all of the ones that were worth the most was not such a great idea after all. Now let's go on over to this player. Let's say this was their card here. Now as you see, we don't have one of each of the 5, so this one is going to be worth the 5, not the 10, and we see that there's a tie for whichever one has the most. So in this case, normally you'd be able to choose which one to throw over, unless one of these happens to be the one that has the 2 possible values. In this case, purple. If that one is one of the ones tied, those are the ones that have to be thrown over. Otherwise, you can choose. And when you're collecting the amounts for all these containers on the island, you're simply taking money from the bank for these. Each player also gets $2 for every container that's in their harbor store, $3 for every container left on their ship, $3 for every container in your personal harbor at the investment bank, and then you would subtract $11 for each loan card that you still have. If it's tied, the player that has the most containers at their factory store wins. If there's still a tie, they celebrate a shared victory. The investment bank is new for this edition, and it keeps the economy a little bit more stable than it was previously. However, if you take it out, it will provide a very different experience, kind of like riding a roller coaster with a little less safety equipment, probably best to those that are experienced with the game. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Container and get to the fun quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed the link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them, because not only will I be notified, but so will Mercury Games.